The second arrived at the annual tech summit, we had spent months refining an adaptive learning algorithm. My algorithm. Not polished, not finalized, but powerful enough to fundamentally reshape enterprise search. I had written nearly 90% of the framework myself, including the neural sequencing that allowed it to operate in real time without hemorrhaging resources. On stage, Benjamin pulled up my demo, skimmed past the technical substance, and introduced it as his latest breakthrough. He even winked at the audience. I didn't clap. I barely breathed. Then came the email, a forwarded message sent to me by mistake from Benjamin to the CTO, suggesting that Scarlett was becoming overly attached to her code and that it might be time to sunset my role or reassign me to something less strategic. That was the third crack, the one that shattered whatever loyalty remained. That night, I opened a folder I hadn't accessed in years. Inside was everything Benjamin never knew existed. Backup copies of my earliest models, original schematics, unregistered prototypes, and beneath my desk, hidden in plain sight, a small black suitcase secured with a biometric lock and labeled as an archival hardware enclosure. Inside it sat a physical drive containing my master architecture, not the sanitized, company-approved derivative, but the original. Clean, unlicensed, untraceable. I sat with that suitcase resting in my lap for a long time, my heart racing, not with fear, but with clarity, with the certainty that something irreversible had just been set in motion. 2 weeks later, it was Monday. I walked into the office wearing a tailored navy blazer, submitted my resignation, and turned away before anyone could respond. Benjamin laughed when he saw the notification. "Good luck finding another job at your age," he said with a smirk. I smiled, perfectly neutral. "Thank you for your wishes," I replied, and headed for the elevator. As I passed him, his eyes dropped to the suitcase in my hand. "What's in there?" he asked. I stopped and met his gaze. "The future you thought you owned." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing his expression behind glass as the hum of the office faded into irrelevance. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Not until I saw his certainty fracture. I stepped out, turned around, and walked back down the corridor with deliberate calm, carrying the box as if it were fragile, even though we both knew it wasn't. I knocked once on his office door and entered without waiting. He looked up from his laptop, surprise flickering across his face. "Scarlett," he said slowly, "what is this, a farewell tour?" I set the box on his pristine glass desk and sat across from him, hands folded, silent. I let the quiet stretch until it pressed in on him. He leaned back, that familiar grin returning. "Old files? A parting gift? I didn't think you were sentimental." His eyes flicked back to the box. "You were loyal, I'll give you that. Too loyal. But let's be honest, at 42, this industry isn't forgiving. Who's going to hire you? A mid-level analyst with no patents, no public footprint, no recognition? Your name isn't even in the footnotes. It's like you were never here." "That's what you're counting on, isn't it?" I said evenly. That I'd fade out quietly. I placed a slim silver drive on top of the box. "This contains an archive of every project I've ever worked on. Version histories, annotated commits, development logs with timestamps, private documentation, metadata, internal correspondence, everything from initial concept to final deployment, including the work you claimed as your own." His posture shifted. The smile thinned. "You signed an IP agreement," he snapped. "Everything belongs to the company." I nodded. Everything developed using company resources, not the frameworks I built at home before they were ever proposed, not the algorithms that predated their internal adaptations, not the early iterations documented under provisional ownership, and certainly not the system you rebranded as BenVision, the one you never checked into the repository. You ran it straight from a USB stick. His face drained of color. "I have the originals," I said quietly, "and I have nothing left to lose." I leaned forward. "You think I'm leaving broken. What's actually happening is a transfer of leverage. You don't control the narrative anymore." He swallowed hard. "You wouldn't dare." "I haven't said what I'll do," I replied. "I just want you to sit with this, to understand that the person you dismissed for 12 years holds the architecture your reputation depends on." I stood, lifted the box, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, I paused. "Check the backup logs," I said. I left you a note, just a reminder that the architecture remembers who wrote it. I was almost gone when his voice cut after me, sharp with panic. You're bluffing. You know the IP policy. Everything made during employment belongs to us. End of story. I turned back slowly, set the box on a nearby chair, and met his eyes. That's true. Except you're forgetting one thing. You wrote that policy. You signed it in 2015 after the Apex lawsuit. I pulled a thick, highlighted folder from the box and flipped it open. Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B. I'll read it for you. Employees retain rights to intellectual property originated and developed outside company time or premises, provided such work does not incorporate proprietary internal resources or confidential client data. I placed the document gently on his desk. You signed off on this, I said softly, almost kindly. In fact, you insisted on the clause. You said it would encourage creativity and help recruit top engineers. Your exact words, if I recall correctly. Benjamin stared at the paper like it was written in another language. And here's the kicker, I continued, pulling out a second sheet, a copy of the time logs I'd exported from our internal network, marked and cross-referenced with project timestamps. These modules were all developed before I ever submitted them, all built on my home machine during personal hours. Every update documented, every file hash-matched. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't smiling anymore. That means the original logic trees, the diagnostic skeleton, the predictive pathway design, they're mine. Legally, creatively, completely mine. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. And if you're wondering why that matters, I said, lowering my voice just enough to cut through the space between us, it's because everything you've built your public image on traces back to one of those designs. I saw it land. That slow sinking realization spreading across his face like spilled ink. His charm fractured, his posture shifted, the gleam in his eyes dulled as the enormity of it unfurled. You didn't just borrow my work. You built your entire career on it. The keynote speeches, the interviews, the awards, all of it. And now I can prove definitively that none of it was yours. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back, but he didn't come closer. He just stood there, hands gripping the edge of his desk, eyes darting from the documents to the drive, then back to me.
You wouldn't go public, he said, but his voice betrayed him, wavering just slightly. You don't want a lawsuit. You don't want the drama. You're right, I said. I don't. His shoulders eased a fraction. But I will if I have to. And there it was, the panic. Not loud or dramatic, just the quiet collapse of certainty in a man who had never once expected to be cornered. Because for the first time, Benjamin wasn't standing in front of someone desperate to keep a job. He was facing someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I'm not here to threaten you, I said finally, slipping the drive back into my coat pocket. I just wanted you to know the truth and to feel what it's like when the narrative slips out of your hands. I turned to leave again, my hand resting on the doorknob when he spoke. His voice was Udal. I said, because from this point on, it's mine. And then I left. I should have kept walking, should have left him there in the silence of his office, with the weight of his own lies echoing off the glass. But something stopped me just as I reached the door. One last page hadn't been turned. One final chapter. I didn't want him to pretend he'd never read it, so I turned back. Benjamin's eyes widened just slightly, only for a moment, before he masked it with a lazy lean into his chair, arms crossed in that familiar CEO posture, confident, dismissive, untouchable, except the cracks were already forming, and I could see them. Ah, I forgot something, I said quietly, stepping back inside and lifting a thin envelope from the bottom of the box. Or rather, I wanted to give you one last chance to see what you really missed. I set the envelope in front of him like a sealed confession. What is it? He asked, though the bravado was gone, his voice thin now, paper dry. A ledger, I said. 18 months in the making. He raised an eyebrow, trying for indifference. A ledger? I nodded slowly. A record of everything you ever stole from me. He opened his mouth, probably to deflect or spin or mock, but I didn't let him. I saved the emails, I said, the ones where I outlined the foundational logic behind the hybrid predictive engine, the ones where I walked you through the machine learning loop we use to cut decision latency by 60%. the ones you printed word for word and then read aloud at the shareholders' dinner like they were your own. His face tightened, but I kept going. I recorded the conversations, the Zoom calls, the late nights when you asked me to explain it again, but slower, because you were too proud to admit you didn't understand the very algorithm that earned us a 7-figure extension from Telesk. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because he knew I was telling the truth. And worse, I had receipts. I even kept the transcripts, I added softly, from the internal Q&A session last year, the one where you spontaneously described our upcoming adaptive logic module using the exact phrasing I'd said to you in the elevator 15 minutes earlier. His mouth parted, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just steady, calm, precise. You always thought I was naive, didn't you? I asked. Thought I didn't see what you were doing, thought I was just grateful to be here. He didn't answer. I was grateful for a while, until I realized I was the scaffolding you stood on while you built your cardboard castle. His hands tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. I started collecting proof when you deleted that first offer from Ellison Dynamics, I said, my voice lower now. You remember that, don't you? The one you told me never came, except the HR assistant had already mentioned it at the offsite. They reached out again a few months later, and again, there was nothing in my inbox. That's when I knew. I pulled a tablet from my bag, unlocked it, and slid it across the desk. There it was, the contract, signed, countersigned, dated, my name printed clearly beside Ellison's crest stamped in digital ink. I signed with them 2 weeks ago, I said. Full recognition, public authorship, my name on the patents, on the rollout, on the launch. They know I built it, and this time I'll get the credit. Benjamin stared at the screen, and in that moment the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't corporate anymore, it was personal, existential, the kind of silence a man hears when the walls of his identity begin to collapse. His voice came out in a rasp. You're going to Ellison? I made them an offer I couldn't refuse, I said evenly, because you refused to even forward it. He stopped himself, because there was nothing left to say. You kept me boxed in here, I continued, kept my name off the decks, off the press releases. You thought if I stayed invisible, you'd shine brighter. But you forgot something important. His eyes met mine, pleading now, quiet, desperate. You forgot that shadows only exist when there's light behind them, and I've been the light this whole time. He slumped just slightly, but I saw it, the first real crack in his carefully constructed image. Benjamin Ross, man of the future, the visionary, the thought leader, was unraveling under the one thing he never anticipated, the truth. You'll ruin your career, he said at last, weakly, as if pushing back might still save him. I smiled, not unkindly. No, Benjamin, I'll finally start mine. And I turned to leave again. This time, I didn't look back, because I knew the moment I stepped through that door, the initiative, the narrative, the future had finally passed to me. I was halfway down the hall when I heard his voice, low and strained. Scarlett, wait. I stopped, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to hear the rest, to feel it. I turned slowly, and for the first time in a very long while, Benjamin Ross didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man beginning to understand how much of his kingdom had been held together by a single invisible thread, and that thread had just snapped. I walked back into his office one final time. He was standing now, behind the desk, as if it might protect him. He tried to square his shoulders, but they didn't settle right. I don't think you understand what this means, he said tightly. You can't just walk out. Not now, I tilted my head. Oh, Benjamin, I said gently, I'm not walking out. I'm stepping away before it all comes down around you. He frowned, that desperate confusion flickering behind his eyes. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, not with malice, just with truth. The system, I said, the one you present in meetings like it's magic, the one analysts and investors and boards praise non-stop. I paused. It doesn't run on magic. It runs on my logic, my architecture, my patches, my predictive loops. You stood in front of people and promised stability, scale, and speed, but you never even understood the backbone. His lips parted. It's stable for now, I said, because I've been maintaining it quietly, nightly, while you polished your sound bites. But now, I let the silence stretch. Now the latency issues will begin. First, a few milliseconds, then subtle data misroutes in the network mesh, irregular forecast mapping, anomalies in user clustering. The system won't fail overnight, Benjamin, but it will begin to rot. He blinked. And you won't know where to begin, I added, because you never even opened the blueprint.
He started to speak, probably a week's denial, but I raised a hand. Oh, and your keynote next quarter, I said, arching a brow. Good luck with that. I won't be ghostwriting at this time or prepping your insightful Q&A answers. He paused. I've read your early drafts, I continued, all buzzwords and empty promises. You'll stand on that stage talking about neural acceleration and cohesive vertical scaling, and someone in the audience, some intern probably, will ask a single, targeted, technical question. I leaned in slightly, and you'll blank. His mouth opened, then closed, panic flickering behind his eyes. But don't worry, I said. The world won't laugh for long. He looked at me, pleading now. Why are you doing this? Because, I said calmly, you built your name on my silence, and I'm done being quiet. I turned toward the window, watching our building's reflection gleam against the glass of another tower. And one more thing, I added without turning around. The new algorithms I've been developing in my spare time, they're real, and they're better. I heard his breath hitch. They're leaner, smarter, self-correcting, and in 6 months, once integration at Allison is complete, they'll make your entire infrastructure obsolete. I turned back slowly, letting every word land. You won't just lose your edge, Benjamin. You'll lose your foundation, because the future's already being built, and this time you're not invited. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth had weight, and it settled on him like a mountain. There was nothing he could do, because for all his titles, Benjamin Ross never understood the thing he claimed to lead. And now that the person who did was gone, truly gone, he was left standing in the ruins of a brilliance he never possessed. And I was already building the next world. I was gone, officially, unmistakably gone. No internal announcement, of course, no farewell email, no company-wide send-off. Benjamin made sure of that. But inside the walls of that glittering tech empire, something began to shift. And outside, where it truly mattered, on the stages, in the interviews, under the spotlight, the unraveling had already begun. At first, it was subtle. His next LinkedIn post landed with a dull thud, a jargon-heavy caption beneath a photo of him standing in front of a server rack he didn't know how to read. Innovation isn't a product, it's a mindset, he wrote. Only 5 likes. Interns reposted it with cautious enthusiasm, the kind you show when you're still too new to recognize the difference between a leader and a man in a tailored suit holding someone else's work. And then came the quarterly press brief, where he stood behind the familiar podium with the same gelled hair and designer suit. But something in the way he held his hands betrayed him, because he didn't know what to do with them. No note cards this time, no whispered prompts in his earpiece, no scarlet waiting in the wings, just glittering generalities about scalable, intense prediction across multi-platform touchpoints, until a Verge reporter asked about the underlying improvements in intent mapping and what had changed in the data architecture since Q3. And Benjamin blinked, smiled tightly, and answered with a layered integration synergy. A response so hollow it drew an audible pause before the typing began, the kind of answer experts recognize instantly as nothing at all. 3 days later, Wired Tech Brief ran a short piece suggesting a leadership shift had left the innovation wing rudderless and questioning whether the ideas Benjamin championed were actually his. And another week later, at the Pacifica Tech Summit, normally his playground, he took the stage with swagger and buzzwords about cognition-driven infrastructure. But when an MIT professor asked him to walk through the model hierarchy of his dynamic learning engine, he stumbled, searched for invisible cue cards, deflected with outcomes over blueprints. And by the end of the summit, the lobby buzz wasn't about what he unveiled, but what he couldn't explain. A moment that went viral on Twitter as people watched him dodge basic architecture questions. I saw it all from my new office at Allison Dynamics, a warm cup of tea in my hands as the sunset bled across the skyline, feeling no anger or gloating, just quiet satisfaction as the illusion he'd curated for over a decade began to crack. Because without my voice behind his words, his empire was just an echo chamber, loud but empty. Later that night, barefoot on my apartment floor reviewing the final drafts for Ellison's product reveal with my name on the header, my phone rang. And there was his name, Benjamin Ross, the man who used to text me at all hours begging for polish. And when I finally answered, his voice was dry and tight as he admitted the conference was tomorrow and he needed my help, the slides, the diagrams, anything. His confidence stripped down to raw panic. And I said nothing at all, letting the silence do exactly what it was meant to do. Then, barely above a whisper, he said it, admitting he didn't know what he was doing. And I froze as he went on, voice rough, confessing he never truly did, that he only repeated what I wrote and memorized what I explained, never understanding the architecture or fully grasping the logic, too afraid to ask questions because it would make him look small. And when he spoke again, the words came slower as he told me I made him look brilliant, that for 12 years he stood in rooms smiling while they clapped, terrified someone would finally ask something real. And now they were. Something tightened in my chest. Not pity, but the ache of 12 years of being invisible, of shrinking so he could be seen. And when he begged me to walk him through it one last time, I closed my eyes and remembered the jokes about my technical tangents, the introductions that made me his right hand instead of the mind behind it, the awards where my name was missing, the applause that should have been mine. And I told him, softly but clearly, no, that I wasn't coming back or cleaning up his mess anymore, that tomorrow he would answer their questions himself or he wouldn't. But it would no longer be my job to save him. His breath broke, almost a laugh, as he whispered, "Please," saying I didn't understand what it felt like. And I looked out at the skyline, the building where I once spent every waking hour proving my worth, and told him I did, that I lived it, and now it was his turn. Before hanging up and feeling the door finally close behind me. The conference took place in the Aurora Grand Hall, all glass and polish, 3,000 specialists beneath glowing LED rings, a cathedral built for spectacle, with Benjamin Ross announced as the closing keynote on the future of learning systems and sentient algorithms, his name flashing above the stage while I watched the muted live stream, waiting to see how far he'd fall. He walked out in the same crisp navy suit and perfect hair, but something lagged in his movements, his smile hesitating as his eyes searched, not like a leader, but like a man grasping for a lifeline. And behind him, the slides rolled, stock images and hollow titles about dynamic synthesis and cognitive resonance, nothing resembling the architecture we built. And as he spoke about adaptive intelligence, the room stayed polite, tense, until Dr. Elsa Mendez asked about neural token condensation at runtime, and he froze, stammering through vague answers, followed by Dr. Lin Cao questioning missing lateral recursion, his replies dissolving into claims of proprietary early-stage design as murmurs spread, until a calm voice rose from the fifth row, suggesting maybe he wasn't the one who wrote any of it at all. And Dr. Natalia Vasquez stood steady and unmistakable, stating that after reviewing his outputs and patents, it was painfully clear someone else with real understanding had been doing the work behind the scenes. Benjamin went pale as Dr. Vasquez turned slightly to address the room, explaining that she had spoken to people who once worked under him, reviewed internal code structures, and knew this man had not designed the systems he claimed to lead. And the murmur that spread through the audience sharpened, shifting from confusion to anger as she faced the stage again and asked where Scarlet Ward was, a question that landed in dead silence, while Benjamin opened his mouth and found no words. That was the unraveling, the instant the emperor stood exposed before the crowd without a script, without knowledge, without the woman who built his kingdom. And the cameras didn't cut away or the lights dim, leaving him frozen there as I watched from my apartment with no smile or gloating, only the steady calm of truth finally surfacing. Because when you spend a lifetime building something real, the world eventually sees it, even if the illusion has to shatter first. When Dr. Vasquez spoke my name, clear and deliberate, the room fell into perfect stillness. No applause or gasps, just a collective breath held too long before whispers spread. Heads turning, fingers flying across screens as they searched for the name that had lived in footnotes beneath someone else's spotlight. Scarlet Ward. I wasn't on the program, though Ellison's team had given me a speaker badge just in case, one I hadn't planned to use or even stay long enough to need. But in that moment, something settled inside me. Not vengeance or pride, just clarity. And I stood, smoothed my black jacket, and walked down the aisle to the soft rhythm of my heels on carpet. Benjamin stepped back as if the floor itself were shifting, looking at me not with anger, but with the hollow stare of a man watching his reflection fade. Saying nothing as I reached the podium, rested my hand on its edge, adjusted the mic, and spoke my name to 3,000 waiting faces before telling them that for the last 12 years, I had been the architect behind the behavioral logic models powering the intent prediction systems they'd heard about today.